So my internet just went out, and instead of doing nothing, I decided I was going to talk about something that I've been thinking about recently. It's come up in a few discussions with my friends and people I don't know because the internet is a wonderful place. That's the phrase, music is subjective. I think that phrase is useless. I think it contributes nothing to musical discussion. And I guess that means we need to look at what is use, like what is useful. To me, that is things that are communicable. So if you can't communicate something, then you don't really have use for it. It's things that people in the world recognize and categorize because we need the categorizations. Maybe that's a tautology because I'm saying that things that we find useful are what we're going to define as useful. But if we recognize it, if we categorize it, then it's useful. Music is definitely a part of that. It's an idea. It's a concept. It's not anything. We can categorize it and we can get specific. One aspect of music and art in general is beauty. Beauty, we would say, is subjective, I guess, right? Because, beauty is in the eye of the beholder is the easy phrase to get across the concept that this sort of thing is not objective. But it's different than anything that's subjective. It's not just any kind of subjective thing. If we look at nature, we look at like something, Matterhorn, the mountain. It's a rock, right? And evolutionarily speaking, there's actually like no reason for us to care about it or to look at it more particularly than any other rock, because it is big stone, doesn't give us like a height advantage over other creatures really. It's impossible to navigate. It's way too tall. It's cold. And it's kind of dangerous. It's surrounded by crags, I'm sure, and wildlife. It's not where other people are. So evolutionarily speaking, like psychology doesn't show us a reason to look at Matterhorn and say, this is beautiful. Especially when we see a photo or a painting of it during golden hour and the sun is plastered against it and it's almost pink in color. There is no reason for us to look at that and say it is beautiful. But yet we do. So that is something that is not unique to an individual. Beauty is found in nature, but it is a human construct. In that sense, it's universal to humans. I'm sure there are some exceptions, but beauty is not completely subjective. So, we have nature, right? And nature is beautiful. Nature also produces sounds. Is the mountain itself art? I wouldn't say so. I would say paintings and depictions of the mountain are art. Are bubbling stars and, Andromeda and distant galaxies, bubbling stars that are, the solar flares popping and bursting into deep space. Are those frequencies that those stars let out? Are those music? No. It's on the human. The human has to be there. So music is a socially constructed thing. Humans have created the concept. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because we observe it existing in our daily lives and we have use for it. So I think I've overcome the postmodern perspective here. I think I've at least gotten to a point where you understand that music is a useful concept, that it involves beauty, and beauty is also something that is not, maybe not inherent to objective reality, but is evident in our perceptions of it as a species, as humans. And as such, we have useful definitions for things. Because the human is involved, we can ask, what does the human do for music? The word expression is something that really captures the human interaction with music, I think. When we think about what music does to us, or what people do when they produce music, it is expressing a message, an idea, an emotion. It is communicating. And in that sense, it's useful. So I think we've arrived at a good place for a formal definition. And generally, if you look up a definition, it will say something to the effect of music is a series of sounds, or just sound in general, that is arranged in such a way to produce beauty of form and an expression of an idea, emotion, concept, message, those sorts of things. That is a socially constructed category, and so because it's socially constructed, we might say, oh, it's subjective. Music is subjective. But there's more to it than that. Humans share experiences. Every human knows what it's like to perceive oneself. There are some limiting cases here, but that's very far from the norm, and that's very far from the group of people who might be enjoying music, or at least are involved in this discussion of subjectivity in music. You have emotions. Humans experience emotions. And there are psychological, evolutionarily psychological reasons for that. You can learn from experiences of other people. If somebody's sad, you can comfort them. And that's good for communication. It's good for being stable in society, or stabilizing the society as well. So it is a human thing, but it's a unanimously human thing. It's a ubiquitous thing. Everybody knows what it's like to be happy, and everybody knows what it's like to be sad. And we actually have structures for those basic fundamental things in music theory. So maybe music theory is a bit Eurocentric, but if we take concepts from classical music, things that have been around for hundreds of years and understood for a long time and studied in academic settings, and we show them to people who have they've never encountered this form of music before. There are studies of this in tribes who have very different forms of music than European-centric music. We show them a major chord, C, E, G. Happy. That's what that means. We know what it sounds like to be happy. We show them a minor chord. Sad. C, E flat, G. We know what it's like to hear sadness, or at least differentiate between the positive emotion and the subdued, solemn, sad, negative emotion. There are a lot of basic structures in music theory that I'm not going to get into. We can understand, rhythms, things like that, and how different structures and harmonies communicate different ideas, communicate different emotions. They make the listener express an emotion. They communicate something. They're useful. They're a socially constructed thing, but they are a category. There are things that are music, and there are things that are not music. A chair is not music. I'm not using this to try to exclude what is music and what isn't music. I think there's a lot of room. Things like 433, while it is a meme, that's music. Recordings of screeching and wailing and loud noises for, tens of minutes, that's still music. It communicates something different. And maybe the beauty of form aspect is a little difficult to find at first, but you can actually break down why something makes you feel that way. If something is shrill, if you're listening to 40 minutes of high-pitched noise and screeching, high-pitched, that's not something that is human. That is actually a function of mathematics. The frequency of a sound determines how high we perceive it in our ears, and frequencies are mathematical things. They're oscillations. These are things that would exist independent of human beings. There are different frequencies that produce different things. So a higher frequency, higher pitch, can sometimes sound shrill. A lower frequency, a lower pitch, can sometimes sound muddy. But in both situations, they have a use. A kick drum. The mathematical construction of a kick drum is actually important when it comes to electronic music and just music in general. You don't get a kick drum by just having a high-pitched noise. That's an impulse, that's a pulse. You don't just get a kick drum when you have a low-pitched release, a low-pitched tone. That's just a low-pitched tone or a bass note. But when you combine a high-pitched note immediately followed by a release of a low-pitched note, so sort of a short low-pitched note, you get a kick drum. That's a mathematical description of a topic that has use in music. There are a lot of things like this in music. Music is very mathematical. Chords are descriptions of ratios of frequencies, and they differ from culture to culture. Maybe the ratios are different. Maybe the space between notes is different. And maybe the whole structure is different. The rhythms are different. The common ways of organizing those rhythms and those pitches and those harmonies and the instruments are different. But those things still work together to communicate something, to construct a beautiful form. Just like how some things can be considered music and some things can't be considered music, I would say you can also make the case that music should be sort of like a spectrum and sort of like a normal distribution, where you can rank the effectiveness of music So this gets a little difficult because effectiveness, maybe we're getting into that territory where music is subjective. But I think there's still room here to be objective, or to, at the very least, be descriptive in a useful way. The sounds, as you organize them, create an expressive, or it creates an expression in the listener. You can organize them with purpose in order to create the expression of a particular emotion. And with words, it gets even easier. So you can make a more effective idea communicated through music. You can also make a less effective idea communicated through music. Maybe things are too messy. Maybe things are too all over the place, and you didn't get across either the thing you intended or really anything. And in some cases, all you need is to get across something very simple. So for example, dance music can be complicated, but at its core, it's trying to accomplish an upbeat tone, tempo. It's trying to get you to dance. So what makes people dance? We can study this. We have waltzes, we have drum beats from millennia. This isn't something that's a new concept, dancing. I can tell you that a side chain that dips down the volume on some instrument to make room for the kick drum is more effective at getting people to dance than not side chaining. And that's relevant. That's important, because you have something that's more effective versus something that's less effective. So in the end, you get a product that accomplishes your intention. And if something does not accomplish your intention, it is not as good as something that did accomplish your intention. And maybe your intention is a bit of a problematic phrase, and intention might be a better one. Music exists outside of the artist. People do perceive it in different ways, but because of our shared experiences, and because of the fact that certain structures almost always produce the same style, the same flavor of emotions, we can understand that it's effectively communicating something. So, maybe there's a bit of a question left here. This is maybe begging the question a bit. Pop music versus some more quote-unquote complicated genre, right? This is something that people who say music is subjective will use. They'll say, well, music is subjective, so I'll listen to my music and you can listen to your music. It's not actually contributing anything to the discussion. And that's probably what I should have hit on more at the beginning, that when you say music is subjective, there's no room for further discussion. You can't discuss what works well, what doesn't work well. You can only say, well, I disagree with you, so I guess we just exist separately. That's not useful. That's not communicating anything. So we have a better way. And in the case of pop music versus other genres, for example, pop music can be complicated. So I'll take the example of something simple, like a simple pop song. Like, I guess, Tiger, is that the name? Tiger by Katy Perry? I don't remember. Whatever. You know the one. It's very upbeat. It's trying to get you to be like anthemically pleased with it. It's trying to get you to be satisfied and uplifted. And I think it succeeds at that, you know? It's a simple goal. And it works fine. Maybe there are some things to criticize. I haven't listened to it in a long time, and I'm sort of glad because it was overplayed excessively. But we can compare that to something that is a little bit more complicated. So, Bodies by Car Seat Headrest. It's a pretty popular song. It's not a pop song by any means. It is an indie rock song at its core. I'll take the 2018 version as my example here because I have listened to the original version in a long time. But anyway, it is an upbeat song. It is fast. It is bombastic. It's distorted. It's saturated. It's loud. And it's accompanied by lyrics that are not that, really. They're nervous. They're a little impatient. And they're sort of stepping around something. And then, of course, the message that the lyrics are literally explaining are actually that. They're nervous and things like that. But the vocals themselves are nervous. And it's getting across the fact that you can have a concept that is, you can have a sound that is communicating, uplifting, dance, get moving. But at the same time, you're dancing to hide the fact that you're incredibly nervous about something. Or you're dancing because you're nervous. Maybe your nervous energy is giving you a lot of energy to dance. And you end up with something that's a little bit more complicated. And I think because it's a little bit more complicated, doesn't necessarily mean it's better. But in the case of that song, I get just as much uplifting, anthemic, satisfaction than I would with any pop song trying to accomplish that sort of thing, or any dance song trying to get me to dance. Maybe the comparison to Katy Perry and Car Seat Headrest wasn't the best, but anyway, I get the same amount of explosive energy from it, and I also get something that's more communicable, that's more expressive and communicates something that I have experienced, that's more relatable. It's a shared experience. I know what it's like to be nervous, and I think most people do too. There's also another part of the song where they talk about like sort of a nihilistic view of things, passingly. Living for the moment. Maybe it's a hedonistic way of looking at things. I don't know. It's like a fighting against death. And if I'm going to die, then why not live for the moment? Live now. Dance. That's more than feel good about yourself and dance. It's a little more. And I don't think any of this really justifies a numeric system for ordering things. But I think that's the next reasonable conclusion for anybody who's trying to construct something like this, is you satisfying their own ego and saying, well, this is why I can give, a Logic album a 4 out of 10, and I can give a Car Seat Headrest album an 8 out of 10 or higher. I don't think you need to get to that conclusion to still look at this and say the phrase music is subjective is a disservice to how music is actually categorized and experienced and used in conversation. I think it shuts down conversation. So people who do experience this sort of belief that music is subjective, and they're going to hear this and say, well, you're wrong, because if you say music is subjective, then you're not including as many people as I'm including. But you don't listen to every genre of music, so you're not including everyone anyway. And I'm not saying I do either. There are some genres I really have a hard time listening to. But if we work to train our ear to understand the complexity of those genres, see the value in them, see the structures and recognize them, and understand the decades, the centuries of theory and progress, communication and beauty that goes into these things. Be comfortable with an acoustic guitar, Be comfortable with auto-tune. Be comfortable with rap. Be comfortable with super heavily distorted drums. All these things are grating, maybe at first, to people who aren't used to them. But they're really important for our experience of all of the expressive things that music has to offer. All of the objectively beautiful things. All of the human things. The purely experienced things that only humans can understand and communicate. Find them in music. Find them in all music. Try your best to get further out of whatever you think is comfortable. And to be honest, if you need help with that, I'm not going to say Spotify is a bad place to start. Maybe they find things to recommend to you because you've listened to similar things, but in the end, you can't listen to the same genre forever. It has to suggest something that's a little bit different. A lot of the best things I've ever heard come from algorithmic suggestions. And maybe, it's a company controlling me. Who cares? It's beauty. Something I enjoy. It's useful. And it is a huge part of my experience as a human. What I want to tell other people. How I organize my beliefs and my memories. And yeah. Music is subjective, but it's much more than that. Thank you.